What's up, everyone? Drew and Hunter here at Misfit HQ, bringing you a special edition podcast, Masters Cycle 1. Yes, we just said Cycle 1. Cycle 1 is in May now. Lots of changes to the season. We're about 4 months roughly ahead of schedule, ahead of where we normally are. I don't want to say that this is like totally an add-on to the Cycle 1 podcast, but I really want you guys to go check out the Cycle 1 podcast if you have time to watch both, because there's some overarching ideas of what we're trying to do with this new season style and what that all looks like, and that applies a lot to the Masters stuff. But now we're going to get into the actual Masters stuff, and I'd like to start with the strength work and the Olympic lifting. Tell me what we're doing.
Yeah, so overall theme of Cycle 1 across the blog and Masters is going to be that breaking things down to the most fundamental stuff. Squat, pull off the floor, and push things overhead. The squatting, not a whole ton to talk about once a week, but the big thing that I'm adding or that we're adding is performing some explosive movement immediately following your back squat set. And the thought behind that is there's a little bit of science, but we're also trying to add kind of that explosive movement without putting you guys another 10, 20 reps below parallel. It's a sustainability thing. Still looking to recruit muscles to jump as high as possible, an expression of explosiveness, but again, not beat you up too badly over the course of this 7-week cycle.
Right. And we've known forever that 3 to 5 sets of 3 to 5 reps is what gets people stronger within these. And you've kind of taken that down closer to the 3 sets, so, in that lighter range, especially with higher reps, but you've added some of that volume back in with these jumps.
Right. We're still trying to just making sure that there's that balance between still putting something heavy on your back, still getting below parallel, still getting that nervous system, your nervous system involved, but without just beating the crap out of masters who obviously need to focus on recovery a little bit more than most. Pull every once a week and alternating between some heavy work and high rep stuff. We've seen a lot of success in both. There's nothing like putting on 80 to 90% of your deadlift on the floor and picking it up. There's just no like neuromuscular response quite like that.
Exactly.
But we've seen a ton of people get stronger within those high rep ranges.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of like skill acquisition and like there's a lot to that.
Yeah.
You blend the two together and the sport starts to make a little bit more sense.
Yep. Yeah. We've seen a ton of success with those high rep stuff. So that will be mixed in as well. And then pressing, alternating between strict press and push press. The first half of that day will be some higher percentage work, and then followed by a max set at a slightly lower percentage. And similar to the back squat, looking at getting people put something heavy overhead. We know the upper body works a little bit different than the lower body when it comes to strength and stamina.
It needs reps.
Yeah. So I'm giving you that one max set press and push press. I think there's a huge transfer from push press into a lot of like gymnastics as well. So I wanted to make sure we got push pressing mixed in there as well.
Absolutely.
So, and then the Olympic lifting, just like in previous cycles, positional work, mandatory kind of positional warm up, and then you'll get the chance to put a little bit more weight on the bar from progressively lower positions throughout the cycle.
And there's some video explanations of these that live somewhere.
Those will get tied in with the description each day. The big difference between this and the blog is the positions start from the floor, whereas the blog work, we typically stand the bar all the way up and lower it to the position that I want. For this stuff, things are coming off the floor. The video explains it pretty well, but you'll still get to build up to different positions, and then toward the end of the cycle, be pulling heavy off the floor as well.
So moving on to the conditioning, bitch work, interval world, the overarching concepts are the same things that we've been doing forever. A Metcon is, for time, or an AMRAP, you get rest and intervals. The bitch work is obviously a place to work on your mental game and the shorter stuff, a lot of it. And then the physical game and the longer stuff. What sort of nuances in there that you can tell them about that makes it a little bit different at
I'll
this time
start
of
with
year?
the bitch work just because that's the more of the mandatory. Those will be mandatory 3 times a week. And similar to the regular blog cycle one, it's all time based. So instead of going 20 calories on the assault bike, we're going to say go 20 seconds as hard as you can. And again, talked about in cycle one, there's just such a wide variety range of people.
Personalize people's training.
Yeah, and if you're a smaller athlete, that is 20 cals is very different than someone who's 6 foot, 200 pounds.
Exactly.
So,
as someone that's fairly large and not in shape, I can tell you that that's real.
Yeah. Someone who's fairly small and in average shape.
Yeah, it's a good comparison here.
But those time ranges still go from the 20-second terrible max efforts to the longer 6 minutes, sit on a rower, stare at the monitor, enjoy yourself.
All sounds terrible to me, but that's fine.
And then so the conditioning Metcons are 3 days a week. None of them are mandatory, but those and the optional bitch work interval pieces, it should be very clear which piece you need to choose, whether it's
I'm pointing at you. You're making these decisions for yourself.
Whether you need 3 rounds for time or like a more volume kind of 15-minute AMRAP piece, or if you need to sit on a machine and sprint followed up with like a gymnastic or double unders or something very just like raw.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I kind of tried to inject into both of those pieces is make a very wide variety of movements and implements. So they're like, I've been experimenting. You've seen it, like carrying
this madman will leave his office, pick up a sandbag, walk down the road. It's like 35 degrees out. Come back in, and
that's good.
I suggest that you guys warm up a little bit more than him. He looks like he's dead by the end of it.
Yeah, warm up. But just I'm trying to. We're playing a lot with time under tension. So carrying a sandbag, even though you're just walking, like that is still terrible time under tension. Carrying dumbbells, carrying kettlebells, whatever. But I tried.
Great way to build a base. It's the perfect time of year for it.
Yeah, and I want exposure to as wide of a variety of things as you can get. Because whether you think of it as a fitness program or not, what we peak for the Open, that is a sport specific, very specific competition. So we'll start wide and narrow it in.
I actually think that we didn't talk about this prior to the podcast, so I'm going to put you on the spot, but I think that the accessory / gymnastics and the maintenance work that you've put in actually kind of go together really well.
Yeah, it's actually, I had to make sure that I was differentiating the two. So accessory work, we have it 3 days a week, accessory / gymnastics work. One of those days, 1 push, 1 pull, 1 midline day, and those are all strict. So again, the idea building from the base up, you still get the opportunity to kip, express that strength and into power output in Metcons, but for the purposes of cycle 1, accessory and gymnastics is largely low intensity. You're not breathing hard, and we're trying to get stronger in those strict gymnastics because it just translates so well.
Exactly. In that masters community, what we're looking for is to either maintain or hopefully even build upon that idea of our bodies are supposed to be one muscle. That connective tissue is supposed to be there. And if we can build this base now and then move into more higher rep kipping and things of that nature in the next cycle, health is, obviously of a big concern in all communities, but specifically, in the masters. So.
Yeah. And that theme is carried out through everything why we're not back squatting more than once a week, why we track the amount of times you guys go below parallel and stuff like that. And then with the accessory and gymnastics, like we don't necessarily need to be kipping at high power output for the entire season.
Right.
Like we can sacrifice a little bit of that up front early on, just trust that stuff gets built in later in the cycle, later in future cycles leading up to the Open. And then the maintenance stuff. Got a pretty good amount of feedback from the post-Open cycle, like going through it on the bodybuilding work that you guys are doing. This is kind of along the same lines, but there's basically mandatory maintenance work 5 days a week. and you'll see what it's based on. It rotates between basically hip, shoulder, and midline kind of maintenance. So exercises, bodybuilding style exercises, small muscle stuff, which sometimes we make fun of, but it's super important, especially for the masters community.
Yes. And one thing to point out here is with being, programming for Misfit Athletics now for 7 or 8 years, I could see this kind of thing coming, because originally we did not write warm-ups or cooldowns or anything like that, any accessory work.
So nobody did it
until it was regionals prep, games prep, things of that nature. And then the athletes would come back and say, hey, I want you to tell me what to do. I don't want to have to decide on this stuff. I don't want to have to think about it, because if I don't have that, willpower at the beginning of my session or at the end, I'm just not going to do it. So that's what this is. That's that like, hey, coach, I want you to tell me how to warm up. I want you to tell me how to cool down.
Yeah.
And then, you know what? I mean, it is a lot easier to follow a prescription than to be like, what am I going to do today?
Yeah. So that's exactly what we did. And just, again, rotating through different, like the major movers, the hips and the shoulders, and then tackling midline work. It can be done before training, but keep in mind that it is not, it's not written with the day in mind necessarily. So if, for example, the maintenance work might be kind of hip centric, but your lift was shoulder press,
right,
and whatnot. So we're still balancing out how much maintenance and what body parts it targets, but it's not necessarily specific to that day. So
that stuff can be very beneficial at the end, based on the fact that your tissues are ready to go through that.
Yep. Or before, as like if you identify certain pieces of the maintenance work that's like, wow, this would be great. There's a lot of shoulder centric maintenance work and I'm pressing today. Feel free to do it beforehand. But it's just like you said, tell people what to do and they'll do it.
Yeah.
Omit it, and all of a sudden people forget like what they need to do to warm up or cool down. So.
So looking at this program as a whole, I would say that specific suggestions for the masters community would lie in, this is probably good advice for everybody, but really paying attention to, hey, I'm only back squatting once a week, so I should be ready for that. My hips should be ready. My glutes should be ready. I should be nice and sweaty before that first working set appears.
Yep.
Because you will get a lot from a 3x5 session if you do it right.
Yeah. If you don't treat sets 1 and 2 as part of your warm up, and only feel good on your third set.
And the young guns, or the 20 somethings, are out there back squatting 3 times a week, and they don't know yet that their prep is going to turn them into a bag of bones with a bad back and bad knees and whatnot.
Yeah.
Like that sort of thing. Whereas within this community, it's really important, if you're going to drop the volume a little bit and just try to put more effort into something, that you recognize that.
Yeah. I mean, that has to be the theme. Like it should be the theme for everybody, but masters have a finite amount of recovery to work off of. So just maximizing each and every one of those pieces, whether that means doing all the mandatory and picking 1 or 2, or cutting off one of the mandatory pieces because you can't sustain that for 5 out of 7 days. But yeah, the warm-ups will obviously still be written for you, but we can't emphasize that enough. Like it is a recommendation. We look at the pieces, say, okay, let's work these ranges of motion, but it can only be so personalized. You guys have to do that stuff on your own just to maximize the training.
All right. Final piece of advice for the masters in cycle 1.
Focus on the mandatory pieces, the raw strength stuff and the positional work. It all comes down to just paying attention to the little things, positional work, being warm and ready to do your lifts. And then like there is something just magical about getting comfortable sitting on a rower for 5 minutes at a time, getting on an assault bike and ripping for 15 seconds at a time. An assault bike piece that has 60 seconds of total work that's spread out over 30 minutes should be terrible. Like you should feel awful afterward. And then I really think to set yourself up. You're going to feel like at the end of the cycle, maybe you've lost something in your conditioning because you haven't been kipping necessarily, like with respect to the gymnastics work. But I promise you, it'll come back quickly when we start to reintroduce that stuff and the bitchnastics and the kipping into cycle 2. You'll find the value in all that strict work. I think it'll pay off big time.
Absolutely. And I think the like asterisk that we can throw in here, if you're getting ready to prepare for the CrossFit Games, if that becomes something that you're doing, there will be Masters CrossFit Games prep.
Yep.
So a lot of this, with all of these moving parts now, we're trying to do our best to make sure that no matter what you're trying to focus on, we have an answer for you. And that will be either the blog, the games prep, or further into the year, once sanctionals come back and there are Masters divisions, we will have competition prep for Masters. So those are kind of the 3 avenues that you can go. There will be some time in between the age group online qualifier and when the games prep starts. And this stuff is really good for that. This is the same concept. You're building a base for a few weeks before you get started on your games prep. It'll all go together really well. We've kind of thought that through.
Yeah. And I kept in mind I built the post open cycle and every cycle is built off of each other, but post open cycle bleeds into the cycle 1.
Right.
Like it's not just like a random cycle after the open as like a fun cycle. Like you can almost think of the post open cycle as prep for cycle 1. So don't forget the things you were doing there. They bleed over and they actually like run right into cycle 1. So one other thing I do want to add, the age group online qualifier ends test week day 1.
Right.
Take a couple days off. Please do not cram test week pieces in there. None of the test week workouts are anything so wild that you would have no idea where you're at.
Right.
As far as like max lifts, the tests are not. They're not as important. They allow you to see your progress, but they are in no way worth cramming because if you were just an age group online qualifier, you probably know these things anyway.
Right.
Don't backload those and put yourself in a hole for week 1, day 1.
So in closing, I just want to add that the longer we do this, the more we have to realize as a group that we can write anything down on paper. You know, you worked your butt off to create this whole cycle, and you're working on all kinds of other stuff, Masters prep here and next cycles. Yeah. But you guys' execution and how much you care about it and what you put into it is really going to kind of be the end all be all of this situation. And, it's one of those things where, we're saying the responsibility is on you and not necessarily on us, but also the credit goes to you. At the end of the day, we're trying to build this Masters community. We're trying to get like-minded individuals together and convince you to work your butt off, have you guys convince each other to do the same thing. And at the end of the day, it's just all about the effort that's put in. The words on the sheet are great. They're exactly what we think you should be doing, but that execution is so important.
Yeah. Program won't work if you don't. So
well, way to take my whole point and say it better than me in 3 seconds.
No, I didn't.
I think that's a great place to end. Cycle 1 test week is 4 months ahead of schedule. It is Monday, May 6th. We'll see you at misfitathletics.com.
Good luck.